Hey, good evening.
Hello.
Oh,
How's it going?
good. Welcome back. Hope the break was good for everybody.
Yeah, pretty productive. Yeah. Except me and GitHub are going round and round. I would start cussing, but I'm cool. I'm cool.
Well, we can help you with that on Saturday.
Oh, awesome. That'll be awesome. Yeah, I went through the pre-work and I thought I lost my library, so I rebuilt my library real quick. So I should be ready to go. Wasn't sure if we'd use it. I think that's what it said. We're gonna add to it.
Yeah, we'll probably be doing, well, we'll probably come back to the coffee shop.
Oh, okay, cool,
But
cool.
yeah. But Braden's teaching this module, so we're back to DOG.
Hey, thanks,
Getting
Zach.
stuck with me.
Cool. There we go.
So cool, yeah. I'll let Braden take it over. But I think we've got that mixer. Is that mixer this Saturday? Or is that next Saturday?
Supposed to be, it looks like it starts at 12. So we have class from 10 to 12, which I thought our class was extended. So I don't know if it's just like downstairs, beside or I'm not exactly sure. I'll try and follow up, take a look at it, because I was kind of wondering that too, because that takes our class time.
Looks like she canceled it.
Oh,
Wait, hold on.
yeah, that way if anybody needs a little extra,
Oh no, I think it's still happening. Yeah, it's still happening.
Cool.
Yeah, so I'll see you all at that this weekend. And make sure you have signed up for it if you haven't already.
Yeah.
I think she's got this Eventbrite thing. Okay, cool. I will shut up. Good luck. We're in React now.
Yeah, good luck, guys. Good luck to me. I'll go ahead and share. We're not going to be looking at a whole lot, just kind of, you guys can see VS Code here. Okay, so I think to start with React, it's kind of a lot of like high level conceptual stuff before we can actually like look at the code, because there's a lot of big changes just in the entire environment that you're working within that have to do with like stuff that React takes care of for you that we kind of manually had to do, and the things that made writing vanilla JavaScript like kind of sucky, right? Like if I look at module 2 and like some of the stuff that we wrote back here, like a lot of the stuff to update the cart is very manual. Like you're having to, if I just want to have cart items and like update the state, like I'm just pushing like raw HTML and stuff to these divs that I'm like trying to latch onto and stuff like that. That's the kind of stuff that React takes care of for you, like the intermingling of updating the page with JavaScript and adding HTML elements to the page. And so that's like the power of what React is trying to solve. And so we can go ahead and like just talk about some things. And there's some links here. This is all stuff from the last cohort that was left in, but I think there were kind of some good resources that we can kind of look at. But I think honestly, the easiest way is like if I wanted to learn about React, I'll just show you what I would go through. And the big thing that we need to learn about is the DOM. I need to be more specific there. DOM HTML. And so like here is a good structure of it. And so basically this is like a huge object that you're interacting with whenever you're creating HTML. And so you don't need to worry about this too much. It's just good to understand exactly what's happening and what React is doing. And so like you can see, like it creates the document HTML, like they had a head element, a body element, and like these each had like the head element had a title in it. The title had this text, and it's like this is a string inside of the element. And so like it's just a big object tree that's a map of all of your HTML, right? And so anytime you want to update your HTML, like say with JavaScript, then your JavaScript loads, you run a function or something, and it updates the DOM. And so whenever you add something to the DOM, like say I wanted to add a new A tag like next to this one, then there will be another object or another item in this object. And then it'll refresh the entire DOM, which is very like slow and expensive. And so what React does is that React has like a virtual DOM. And so we'll see if we can see like a good visualization of the virtual DOM. Yeah, this is what I was looking at earlier. So this is similar, they're just kind of dots, but you can kind of see like it's the same tree-like structure. And so here's the real DOM, here's the virtual DOM. And so React basically creates like after your JavaScript loads, it creates like a copy of the real DOM that is just sitting like in what we call like in memory, like the browser is just holding that data. And so like this red one is like, hey, we added this red node to the DOM tree in the virtual DOM. So like React is not direct, like you are not writing directly to the DOM with React. You're writing directly to the virtual DOM that React is kind of providing for you and creating for you. And so then you will just say, hey, I want to add this element. And then React handles updating the actual DOM and like keeping it in sync. And so this is all kind of like weird stuff. Like I had to do a lot of research to like kind of remind myself how this stuff works, because like the great thing about React is it kind of takes all of this stuff away. And so you don't really need to think about it. It's just good to kind of have a base understanding. That way, whenever you get deeper into like page re-renders and stuff like that, you kind of know what's happening. And so there's a lot of conceptual stuff that eventually you just kind of won't have to think about. And that's kind of the beauty of React, is that all of this like inner working stuff, it kind of abstracts away, and to where you can just focus on like writing to the page in kind of clean, efficient ways. So that's like one big thing with React, is like it handles updating the document for you. And so like you've actually been interacting with the DOM, the document. DOM, I think I don't actually said what that means. What does DOM stand for? So this is the document object model, right? And so the document, that's like a word that's kind of familiar to what we've been using. And so if we look like in our like 3, I don't know, 5 maybe. What is module 3? Oh, we're on module 4. Module 2. We'll just do this. I forget a minute. So like here, we're saying document.getElement by ID. And so this is a method that exists like on that big document tree, that DOM. And so these are like methods that exist on the tree itself. And so like you're actually like updating that element from the DOM itself. So like you've been interacting with it, you just kind of didn't really need to worry about what it was, but like that's what this is. So that's like one big piece. The other big piece of React is kind of the, whoa, I don't know what I did there. The other big piece is that it makes kind of reusable components. And so like think about whenever we did module 1 and we had like this nav bar here, like we had to just like paste it between both, right? React lets you take that into like what we call a component. So just one small piece that its entire job is just, I'm going to create the HTML for this piece, and then that can be used across multiple places. And so there's some pre-work that I'm gonna send out tonight that will kind of explain a lot of the inner working stuff about how all of that works. But for now, I think we should just start kind of looking at like getting familiar with how the React ecosystem is set up. And so that's this command here is going to like basically create a new project. And so I'm going to come into, I'm in curriculum right now. And so I'm going to cd into module 4 is what we're on. And then I'm going to cd into day 1. And then I'm going to go ahead and run that command. Are you guys familiar with what npx does? Have you guys seen this before?
No.
Nope.
So you've seen like npm, like the end of the last class we had npm, like Zach was teaching about, was like the node package manager, right? And so if I wanted to say like npm install some package, then that's like using the npm tool that is built into Node, and it's installing that package locally, or you could say -g to have it globally, right? npx is like saying npm, but it reaches out and it can execute commands that you have for packages locally. So let's say you have this create React app package locally installed. You could say npm run create React app, blah, blah, blah. You're not going to need this package all the time. And so what this lets you do is that say npx, and it'll look locally for the package and try to run the command if it exists. And if not, then it'll reach out to the browser. So you don't actually have to install it if it's not going to be something you're using all the time. And so you can say npx create React app. And so this is going to look out to the browser, find the create React app package that exists in npm, and it'll run that command. And so if I just hit this, then it's going to say, hey, you need a name, a project directory to go with it. So we need to just name the project directory. So if you hit space and then type in the name of whatever package, whatever project you're creating. And so I'm just going to call this day 1. Number or words. We'll do numbers. Or we'll do words. Okay, so we'll create that, right? So yeah, see, it's reaching out to create React app, installing this package, and then it's installing the things we need: React, React DOM, React scripts. So this will take a second while it is setting up all of our stuff and installing all the stuff that we need. Is this big enough? I can make it a little bigger. Okay, so now if I do ls, you can see I have this day 1 folder now. And also, if you see, it gave us some things here. Inside the directory, you can run several commands. You've got npm start, npm run build. We won't worry about test and eject, none of that matters. Really won't even need build. So for us, this npm start is the command that we're going to be super focused on. We can go ahead and cd into day 1. And then I'm going to close. We'll just open this one too. Okay. Whoa, what's going on here? Oh, I clicked on GitLens. Okay, so this is everything that it installed for us here. Some of these things we've seen before. Zach was telling us about package.json, package lock, the node modules that come along with everything we need. And it also comes with a README. It's a bunch of like information on exactly how things are working these days. There's one important thing to know is that create React app like this, you don't have to use it to do React or to like start React things, right? This is just like an easy way to just build a whole project that kind of has a lot of the little things taken care of for you. And it's like for our class purposes is what we use. It's actually deprecated now. So like you wouldn't actually use create React app to like, if you were going to start your own production application, there's like kind of frameworks on top of React, like frameworks for your JavaScript framework that are more complicated these days. But I think it's good to just start with the basics. And so we're just going to learn regular React from here. But you definitely would want to kind of start reaching out after this course and learn some more like things, like it's, the one I'm thinking of is Next. It's kind of becoming the standard. It's very popular right now. React is changing a lot right now. They're pushing a lot of new things, but it's not really been like battle tested by the community and by the industry yet. So we're just going to kind of keep going with this until like, I don't know, 80% of the React people out there are all using these new technologies. So for now, Create React App, I think, will just be a good learning tool for us. So let's look at the things that it spits out. It's got a source folder. It's got a bunch of files in here. And we can just go ahead and just like delete some of this stuff, like set up tests, this. We don't really need web vitals or the testing stuff. We can just delete that. What did I do? I think I clicked the whole source file. Classic. Well, that was a oopsie daisy. Luckily, I can, this is the command to delete the folder. So I'm just going to kill the folder and install it again. Running that Create React App again. Now we get to wait again because I'm a goof. Hey, this one went faster. Okay. Starting again. CD back into day one. I need to close this because this file doesn't no longer exist. And then we can open it back up again. Okay, here we are again. We're just going to leave this stuff instead of trying to delete it to be safe. So let's look at some of the important things here. So if you got a CSS file, this is all just like, I can show you what it's doing. And so the command that I suggest is npm start. And so if you're inside of the root level of this folder that it builds for you, so day one here in the root level, you can run npm start. And so this is going to basically like build a web server and host this in a local host. And so like here is what all of the code that gets pre-bundled into this Create React App is like adding this text and this button that like links to the React website and like has like spinning SVG. And then so here's the server right here. And so you'll see this has this thing called Webpack, and also Babel and things like that. This is the reason that we're using Create React App is for things like Webpack and Babel. Like the hardest part about web development is that there's so many little things inside of your environment that you kind of have to be as a master in every single one. And most of the time you won't really need to touch it to just do like your regular job, especially like as a junior developer. And so this kind of handles like all of the configuration and setup and anything like that that you need to do. And so it goes ahead and it builds you stuff called Webpack. And so what Webpack does is kind of what we alluded to last time, is that if I am in module 3, I think we were in npm example 7. Let me find a example where we're using require. So here we're saying, where are we at? Module 3, day 4. So we're saying const test JSON equals require from this file. And we're also like using this package crossfetch. So what Webpack lets us do is kind of, we can write this as import fetch from crossfetch. And so like this is kind of like the more standard one now. But this only is on like, you can only do this on the latest versions of JavaScript, and not every browser supports the latest versions of JavaScript. Think like Internet Explorer, stuff like that. And so what Webpack does is it takes the code that you have in your repository, and then it like compiles it down into like a version that that all browsers can understand. And so it'll take all your imports and turn them into requires, but you never will really need to write these again unless you're working like in backend stuff. But for most of the time from now on, when we're like importing files or packages or anything like that, we're going to be using this notation and not this one. And we'll learn about that a lot today. So we'll no longer need to require anything. And so if I come back over here, you'll see I've already started doing that stuff here. So that's what Webpack is doing for us. We've got this logo that's getting imported from this other file right here. And this is just an HTML SVG. I think it's just a SVG file. I don't know. It kind of looks like an HTML element though. But so that's getting imported from that file as logo. And then we're doing something fancy here that we haven't seen yet. And so this is the other like big fancy stuff, is that you can write HTML only when you're doing React. Like you don't have to do anything special. But you'll notice like none of these are HTML files. There is an HTML file here, and we'll talk about that in a second. But where most of the time, like I don't work in HTML files like ever anymore. Like writing raw HTML is just kind of like a sub thing that is a lot of your code just gets compiled down to HTML. And so now for the most part, you'll be writing things that look like HTML. But this is actually what's called the JSX, which is, we can look that up to get a good explanation. So this stands for JavaScript Syntax Extension. And so it's like writing HTML. It just lets you kind of, the best way that I think about it is like, let's say, I'm just going to come down here and do an example. So if I have like test string, and I wanted to write like a template literal, you guys learned these, right? If I wanted to say like something, and then I escape it, and then I can do something inside of here, like actual JavaScript inside of here, not just, it's not writing a string anymore. So I could say like, I don't know, 1 + 2. So like you can execute JavaScript inside of this like escaped string. And so that's kind of what JSX does for you. It has a different syntax. So like right here inside of this return statement, this is returning all JSX. And so if you're inside of a div here, inside of any kind of element, it just knows that you're starting to write JSX. And that is a thing that like Babel is the other like little thing under the hood that is like, it's compiling all of that for you. And it's running special methods that you learn about in the homework. I don't want to get too deep into it because it's like, you'll learn about it once, you'll understand it. But the guy that we're going to be following, he explains it a lot better than me. And so we don't really know. It's just like a learn it one time, never think about it again. But kind of how you can think about it is you're just writing HTML, and then you want to like escape out of it to write some JavaScript. And so like here, this is a JavaScript thing that gets imported, and I've got this image, and then like I'm escaping this. So like normally you would say is image source equals blah, 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 whatever right here, right? Well, we're importing the entire file itself, the whole SVG, and then we're just passing that entire SVG to the source. And so like this is like being escaped basically out of that. Like you can think about it as HTML, really escaping the JSX and putting in actual JavaScript. And so I could say like things you're pretty used to, like I could say, we've got this right here, this p tag. So I could say I could add a new element here, like a div. And I could say like hello world or something, right? But if I wanted to say like add something here, then I could just inside of that div, just put in some content. And then up here, I can define what content is. And so like, let's say under certain scenarios, which we don't really have any logic at this point. So I'm just gonna write a like a fake ternary. And we can do this, so like we'll say. So I've got a div that says hello, and then it has content. And so if content is true, which is just set to true always, then it's going to say world. But if this is false, then it's always going to say there, right? And so if I go to my browser now, what you'll notice, like this automatically updated. I didn't need to do anything like React, like the running npm start. That's like the equivalent of saying like running live server on one file. But like, so right now it says hello world. I'll come back to my code. I'll flip this flag to false. Come back and now it says hello there. So like automatically hot, that's what we call hot refreshes. And so that's all being handled by this Webpack server that is running right here. And so like you see like Webpack compiled, so recompiled. Whenever I hit save, it recompiles the code and then serves it up to the browser again. So that's like a quick look at JSX. We'll kind of investigate that some more today, but that's kind of step one there. We can delete this stuff. And let's look at like what this is, right? So we've got a function. This is kind of the weird part, is that we've got this HTML, but it's wrapped in this like kind of empty function that just returns this. And so like what this entire function is right here is a component. So this is one piece. And so if I wanted to write a new component, I could just do it right here. You could say function block or something like that. And then write your block. And then you could say return some JSX. So you open this parentheses so that you can return some JSX there. Let me turn off Copilot so it's not trying to help me so much. Disable globally. Okay. So like I can write a div and I can say my block, and then it just formatted again. But so now I've got this block, right? Now I can take this block, and if I want to render it inside of here, like use it inside of this app, then I can come down here and I've now basically created a new component, a new element, like a new HTML element, basically, that has this name of block, and you call it like it's an element with these tags. And then it will render whatever JSX is returned there. So it'll execute anything. So like if I say like console.log, hello from within the block, it's going to run any JavaScript that you have here. It's like you could have like just infinite number of code execute here. And then after it does all of that, it's going to return this JSX down and render it inside of this app. So like I'm going to go ahead and use the shortcut here. So anything that you don't have children defined, like something in the middle here, you can just close it like that. And so pretty much any component that doesn't have children, which will be a lot of the time, you'll render something that doesn't have children. You'll write it just like this. And so if I save that, I come over here, I've rendered my block, and I can come open this up and go to the console, and I've got, if I refresh, so you'll see that it calls this twice. We don't have to worry about that a whole lot, but basically, when you're in like a test environment, it renders your page twice to double check that like nothing changes between re-renders, just to, safety stuff. We don't really need to care about that right now, but a lot of the times, like if you'll see, like if you're running something in a function, it's going to render the function twice. And so you'll get it logged twice. But if you were in like a production environment and you had a console.log or something like that, which you shouldn't in a production environment, but it would just render once. So this JavaScript gets ran whenever we render this component, and then the content that is returned, this JSX down here, gets rendered onto the page. And the kind of magical thing about JSX is that it's so open, like it doesn't have to be a div. Like I could literally say my block as a string here, and then it still will render, because like it's taking the string and it's gonna do whatever, like under the hood, what it needs to do to determine how to render that into HTML, and it's gonna handle all of that for you. And so like you can just return this, and this is still a component, and it's still rendering that. It's just once this runs, it's just going to throw in a string that is equivalent of saying like oh, that's not how that works. There we go. And it's like it's basically just putting this onto the HTML right there, right? This is what comments look like inside of JSX. Like it's like escaping and then doing a, I don't know what kind of comment this is. I just hit command / all the time. So I don't actually really think about what the actual syntax for comments are, but I'd recommend probably doing the same. So that's like what this looks like, right? Like this is one component, this is one component, and this component is being called here. And the only reason we have access to this is because it's in the same file, right? Like it's just like JavaScript, where if I had a function defined here and a function defined here that calls this other function, like if I make a new file here, I call it my block. I'm gonna start using JSX. That's a new file type that we haven't seen before. Anything that returns a component, you'll just want to make a JSX file. Just to notate that it's like we could rename these honestly, because they probably should be JSX file. So like app, and then index. This one's not really a component. So this is a component because it has this here. And then we got this one. Okay, so now let's move this block over to this file. And then I'm going to go ahead and show you guys the next piece. We saw the import here. And if you want to import something, then it needs to be exported, which in, I don't think you guys may have done that from the other side, as you weren't working in a lot of multi-project things, but a lot of time in React, you want to keep your components very small and separated in their own places. And so you'll have like, I want the block JSX file, and all this file is going to do is just define what this component looks like. And so then you're going to have this function block, and then the kind of standard is to say export default block. And so you'll see like before this, it says like, hey, this is defined and never used. And if I uncomment it, like now it knows like, hey, it's being exported, it's going to get used somewhere else. And so now I've got the same component here, right? And you'll see like this is no longer defined because it's not in the same file. And so if I want to use block, then I need to import it from this other file right here, right? So I need to say import block from block. You don't need to say JSX. It'll understand all of that for you. We can get rid of this test string down here. And you'll see the app is default exported here too. Okay. So this is kind of like the standard thing is you write a component file. This case, it's just this tiny little file. Generally, you wouldn't just return a string. I just wanted to show you that you could. We're just going to wrap this in a div. Spam, spam. Okay, so we got a div that is a block. And we're importing it into app.jsx and rendering it. And so we come back over here and it works again. Any questions around just kind of high level stuff? Any weird feelings around like how this differs from just writing HTML and JavaScript?
So you can't put JavaScript in your return statement, right? It can only be HTML or like string.
Yeah,
the
so
function.
so it can really be anything, but generally, if you're writing a component, the goal of the component will be to return JSX, yeah. And if you wanted to execute JavaScript in here, like I could put a thing here and then do something inside of this JavaScript, right? Like, if I had, I'll come back to that. We're gonna kind of talk about that later, and I'll show you something that is we're gonna use JavaScript to render elements, and that'll be kind of the big aha of like why it's so good, why everyone loves React.
So is this very similar to the Next that you were speaking about? Like, is it like the same structure? Is it a little bit different?
Yeah, so Next pretty much like React and Next both are kind of like use them as much as you want. And so we could have started with Next, but I just wanted to kind of piece it. But like you don't have to use all of the features that come with Next. You could just, there's a similar command like create Next app that it also exists. It would just have a bunch more files and a bunch more configuration that Next needs that we also wouldn't care about. And so it would just be, when we're starting, it would just be more things to delete. Maybe like halfway through this module, we can talk about like using Next and kind of, because that is kind of where it's leading. So it might be good to be a little familiar with it. So we'll probably like build out a module, build out a project kind of halfway through this module that we'll use Next for, and just kind of, we're not going to do anything super high level, just like it will work the same, and you can use as many features or as little features of Next as you want. Which is why it's kind of like we could have used it, but for just learning the basics, it's just going to be a bunch of extraneous stuff that we're not even going to use at this point. Sweet. Okay, so yeah, we've got this block component. Okay, so here's kind of the second part, right? Is that I import the block once and I render the block once. But let's say I needed the same component multiple times. Like now I have 1 million of them. And so like it renders all of those. And so like this is the reusability aspect, is that I only ever need to write, like if I needed this spinner component in the nav bar and needed it like inside of a input form or something, and I just wanted to show it everywhere, I just need to write one component that defines what it looks like, and then just import it and just render just that component. And so if you want to kind of keep your components small, do exactly what they need to do, that way you can kind of use them often. And so for things like the nav bar, we could write like a navbar.jsx, write all of the things inside of it that need to exist. The nav bar could even be consisted of smaller components, like you've got a nav item component. And so then like if this was a nav bar, lowercase, yeah, it feels right. So I could rename the block to nav bar, save that, come over here. It updated my import, but not my definition here. So I'm gonna make these all like nav bars. I don't need all these. Let's just put this here. And we can just go ahead and just like delete this header, it's fine. So we actually probably don't need that app CSS anymore either, but we'll leave it for now. So we've got this class name. We'll talk about that. to just kind of ignore that for now, and we'll talk about styling and stuff later. But yeah, so I've got this nav bar, and so then I could make a nav item.jsx const nav item. Oh, I'm sorry. Function nav. Let's talk about that real quick. You can write them like this. It's just a regular function, right? So any way that you could write a regular function, you could write a function component. And so like, what is the other way that you could write a function? Do you guys know?
The fat arrow functions.
Right. And so like, if I wanted to like write this exact same thing, but with a fat arrow, I could say const nav bar equals this, and then I could return stuff here, right? And then it's gonna freak out because they're the same name, but this is the exact same. I'm gonna write stuff like this because it's just like the practice that I always follow is just everything that can be an arrow function should be an arrow function so that it can be consistent. At this point, there's really no difference for you guys. The differences are like so minute between them that I just think it looks nicer, it looks cleaner, so I just use this one. So I'm gonna do the same over here. So I'm gonna make a nav item equals this. Let's get this. So we're gonna return some nav item. I don't remember what the is there not a HTML element that's like a nav item or something?
It might be a div nav. No, there's nav, yeah.
There's a whole nav. I thought there was a something that goes inside of it. I don't know. I was gonna try to just like use regular HTML tag. We
I've
can just
always
make
seen it as list items, not nav item, but list items.
Sure. Okay. So we can return some LIs here, right? So that's like part one is that we have this component. For now, we'll just say nav item inside of here. And then we need to export this. Don't forget to export it, nav item. And then we come into our nav bar. And then instead of returning this, we want to return some nav items. And if you just start typing it is what I normally do. And then you can see like it comes up here. You can just click it or hit enter and then it'll import it automatically. And then I'll self-close it and then I'll put a couple of these in here. So this error right here, this is something you'll see pretty common. You can only return one element at the top level as JSX, like because right now this is effectively like an array of elements, or really we just need one element to come out, like one JSX element. And so what you could do is like just wrap all of these nav items in a div or something. And so like now the error is good because it's one element that has, you know, things inside of it. And so now if I go back to my code, I've got a nav bar. We used LIs and so it's got stuff, but so we've got all these nav items, right? The other thing we can do is like inside of our nav bar, instead of just importing and calling these manually, we could say like define a list of the nav items that we might have. So you could say like home, let's probably use strings, home, menu, I don't know, contact, stuff like this, right? I need to name this array. So nav items So we've got like a list here. And so inside of here, instead of saying, I could just manually say nav item. And so these are functions. And so you might be wondering, like, how do I pass arguments to the function? And so like what that looks like is like if I wanted to say, like, make a nav item for home, I could say, I need to give it some name, because it's basically like an object is how you can think about it. As like you're basically calling nav item like this. And so then whatever you put right here will go in this object of like it's one argument that goes into the function. And so like if I said like label or title or something like that, this is kind of the syntax. It looks like HTML attributes. And so I could say home. And then so that's effectively I'm calling this nav item function with a title property that has the value of home. So it's kind of like these are pretty much the same. But JSX like knows how to handle this, and React knows how to handle this properly, where this is like kind of funky. And so anytime you want to pass something here, it is basically throwing it into an object and calling that function. And so if I delete this, save that, come over here. Now I have this, the place where I define the parameters of my function. And so like on this side, we called it and it was an object. On this side, we're expecting an object. And so I could generally, we call this props. And so if I just say console.log props, I'm just going to delete a few of these for now just to simplify. That way we don't have a million console logs. Make sure I don't have any other console logs happening. Okay, so it's just one nav item, and the one nav item is logging its properties that are coming through. So if I go back to the browser, refresh, you see I get an object, its title and its home. And so inside of our nav item, you can destructure these props. It's pretty common. Like you guys looked at destructuring, you're comfortable with destructuring. So you could say inside of here, you could say props dot title, accessing this property on this props object. Props is a pretty standard word that is like used kind of everywhere. So you'll kind of hear me say that a lot, and people will say that a lot. It just means properties, just short for properties. And so like these are the props that come through, and it has this title property on that object that we saw there. And so then if I save this, now we've escaped the inside of this LI and passed in whatever the title was that was passed down, right? And so whenever I called it, now I've got a home nav item that I'm passing from here. And so then I could say home menu contact, stuff like that, right? And so then now when I come back, I should have 3. And you can see it's like logging each of them from within is logging its own props. And so for the first one, its props was title home. The next one was title menu. The next one was title contact. And so it's running all 3 of those whenever it's rendering the JSX. It's executing all 3 of those functions in order to put them on the page. And so that's kind of step 1, is you can just hard code the items and pass these properties through. And they come out this other side, and you can pass them into your JSX and return them. Kind of the big thing that I was kind of wanted to wait until later is kind of what you were talking about, Alex, was like, if I wanted to run JavaScript in here, instead of having these 3 manually defined, you could just use an array method, because I have this array defined up here. You could just use an array method inside of the JSX, and then return more JSX to be rendered on the page. And so let's look at what that would look like. And I'm going to have you guys help me try to write this. Okay, so I've escaped it. Like, what's kind of step 1 if I wanted to like so inside of here, like I'm writing JavaScript right now. It's like, what's step one of like mapping through this array?
It's gonna be nav items dot for each.
For each. Okay, and then what?
Element. And then the rocket function. And then it's like. I'm not sure where to go from here, to be honest, with the nav bar
Gotcha.
thing.
And anybody want to help them out? Like, what are we trying to return here? Like, what is the goal output here?
You want to put a nav item
Right,
with
yeah, so
the
we
title?
right, we want to return JSX is the goal. Is like, we're trying to like you can treat this inside here like it was this outside like return statement. And so here, I'm gonna say nav item. I'm gonna pass it a title, which we can look at what is gonna be inside the title in a second. And so it's gonna return this nav item with the title. And it's like, what is this value gonna be here, the title?
Element.
Okay, so right now I've got a string of element. And so if I wanted to actually use the actual value, you can just escape and use the actual JavaScript value that's coming through instead of the string of element, right? Because if I just said element here with string, like just, that's kind of the thing you want to wrap your mind around, is like, if I'm just saying like element here, or you could even like think that you might be able to say element like this, because like I'm doing JavaScript, I'm saying nav items for each, but once you come inside of here and you said, I'm trying to define a nav item, like now it knows that you're writing JSX again. And so now that you're inside of JSX again, you need to escape the JSX again to start writing JavaScript again. And so inside of here, you could even do more JavaScript. You could say, you know, like nav items dot find, or like you could just like keep going and keep returning JSX and keep escaping it and running JavaScript. But in this case, all we need to do is just find this element and pass it. Okay, so there's an issue here. Does anybody know what that might be? So I'm no longer executing. Let me put my log back in right here. Log props. Yeah, so like that nav item component is not getting called anymore. Because like, we're not seeing this console.log come out. And so we should see it for each nav item. We're saying for each, and then we're returning this nav item. This is kind of a hard one. I think it's kind of like a small thing here, but I would say most of the time, just don't use for each. You just want to use map, because map returns an array of the items, where for each just loops through them and then does nothing with the output, right? So no matter what, even if I returned this nav item here, it's never getting actually returned to the JSX. Like that array of JSX items is never getting returned. And so even though it looks like it's getting called here, it doesn't actually get called until React takes that element and decides how to render it. And that's never being returned to this JSX out here. And so now if I save this, you should be able to see them. And that's true for like most cases. Like if I was gonna say like something to do with this nav items, like new nav items is nav items dot for each, like you could do something here, but like this now has no value because for each doesn't return anything. But if you do use map, then this would be whatever the loop returned, right? But if you wanted to use for each, like say I didn't actually need this value, and you could say for each and do something in here, you could also just use map and do something in there, and it wouldn't, even if you never used the return value, map still loops exactly the same as for each does. And so like, I would just use map almost all the time, basically, just as a helpful thing. More, it does the same thing for each does, but you'll never be like, oh, it didn't actually return, like, where's my stuff? Okay, so now we've basically got like this. We've got this list of items, and we're taking, I'm gonna change the word element just to be semantic. So if you have nav items, one nav item, so that's the thing you're mapping through is one nav item. If this is plural, this is singular. So that's kind of how I normally do it. And then you can say that. And so now we've like rendered stuff to the page, right? And so we only have like, I don't know, 15 lines of code collectively that are actually rendering JSX. But it kind of feels maybe like a waste, right? Because we could have just made 3 LIs inside of one div and put it right here with HTML, and it would have done the same thing. But it's kind of like, as you scale, as you get bigger, as you need to make things more reusable, then this will actually save a lot of lines of code, less duplication, more separation of concern, all of the, you know, best practices that you kind of need to start thinking about. Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of everything I really wanted to cover for today. That's kind of our high level overview. Real quick, if you guys are kind of eager beavers, we have a couple minutes left. There's a different kind of component that exists in React land. Not everything looks like this. Not everything's a function. And that's called a class, which I don't think we've looked at classes in any modules, and you won't, because they suck and nobody wants to use them. So, but there are class components, and so if you see them out there, they will look a little different. Like if you were to say like, apply for a job and be like, hey, I know React, and they're like, yeah, we use React, but then you show up and they only use class components, like it might look all foreign. And so you have to kind of like be familiar. But in this module, we're just going to be learning, function components. That's like the new standard. But this is kind of what it looks like. You've got a class, you've got the name of the function, the name of the component, and it extends this thing that gets imported from React itself, React.component, and then it has a render method that returns JSX like how our normal function components do. And so like all of this is the same thing as saying function car return this. And so like it's just more lines. It's just nobody likes using classes. And later on they'll have like extra methods, like class methods that we won't use because we have what we call hooks, and we'll learn about those. But if you see anything in your homework or you're looking for help, anything that says class component, you can kind of just avoid that. You'll just want to be looking for like function component. And if you just type this, like this will get you where you need to be. Okay, any questions about anything we talked about today?
Just to double check, so you're saying the React app does make it where we could use modern, like up-to-date JavaScript and not have to worry about the browser compatibility?
Right. Yeah. And so
Okay.
like there's for anyone who doesn't know, there's like versions of JavaScript. And so the most up-to-date version is ES6. And so that's what like lets you, well, the big shift, like ES6 and forward is like modern JavaScript. My dog's freaking out. But ES6 is what gives you the ability to write arrow functions, to use the import statements like ternaries and all kinds of things like that. And all of that gets compiled down to more primitive JavaScript that any browser can understand, Internet Explorer can understand. Yeah. And yeah, that's exactly why we're using create React devs, because we don't want to think about how to compile all of our code down. This like comes out of the box and does it for us.
Okay, yeah, I was just wondering. I've noticed some new methods and everything that I've come across where it's like, oh, this just came out in 2022, so you got to be sure it'll like parse properly.
Right. There's actually one thing I glossed over. We're a little over time, but this one's going to be real quick. Is like, how does all this stuff get put onto the page? Which is like the first thing, like, again, it's one of those things like you're gonna learn and then never really need to care about, but it's just good to know. So like in this public folder, there's this index HTML. And so this looks like a million comments and stuff. So we can just delete this so you can just see it for what it is. So all our HTML is for our entire application is just this head, which has metas, links, blah, 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 a title on it, and then a body, and this has no script, and that is an element that gets anytime the browser doesn't detect JavaScript, whenever it's running, it'll show this. And so if I were to go to my browser, disable JavaScript, then I would get this message that says you need to enable JavaScript to run the app. And then there's just one div that has the ID of root. And so that's like the standard, is that you just have a div with an ID of root. If you wanted to like do any kind of library things where you like import a script tag or import fonts and stuff like that, you could do that here in just your base HTML. It's still just an HTML file. But what our index.js here is doing is we're going to take what you've seen before, document.getElementById, by ID, and it's finding that root element, and then it's going to use this React DOM. This is the two libraries that React needs, is React and React DOM. React DOM is like things that actually interact with updating the virtual DOM, things like that. And so it has this function, create root, that it exposes for us, and so we can call that with that HTML element, that root element that it found. So this is the root, and then it's going to call this render method on that root itself that comes from this create root from React. And so whenever it renders, it's going to say blah 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 strict mode. We don't care about that. This is just React stuff. Doesn't matter. I don't even know what it does really that much. And then it's going to render our app. And so like that's where app comes in. It renders navbar. We render navbar, and then it renders nav items. And so like this index.js rendering app is kind of like the cascading point. And so everything is coming from here, and it's all just latching on to this root element here. And so like, really it's just, we don't have any like HTML in our whole application outside of this. And it's just a div. And then after JavaScript loads, we just shove all of our compiled JSX that boils down to HTML. React is like handling how to add that into the actual DOM so that the browser can update. And it's just shoving it all on top of this div right here. So like if I were to delete this, the whole app would break. So don't. But that's kind of like the full scope of it, is that it starts right on this div with root. It goes into index.js, renders app. And so that works just like rendering any other component. It doesn't need to be named app. That's just also a standard. It's just app.js is like your base point, the top level of your whole application. And so you import app and then render app on your root. And that's kind of the overview of your first day of React. A lot of stuff, and it's a big jump, but I think some things are familiar and you kind of got to cling on to those. Is like when you're writing JSX, you've got to just think about it like HTML. You can write regular HTML. You don't need to write any JavaScript until the point that you need to, and then you can say, inject it with any kind of methods or elements that you need to add with JavaScript. But no longer will you have to say like, find this element and do .inner HTML and anything like that. Like all of that is gone, which is good. That stuff sucks. Okay, guys. Any last questions?
So, I just need to just follow the instructions and download React and start playing around, huh?
Yeah, so there was create React app skipped a step for us because it automatically installed React. And so if I were to look into my package JSON, it has React DOM
I thought I
automatically
saw.
installed. It also
Okay,
has a thing called React scripts. We don't need to worry about that, and just a bunch of other nonsense we don't care about. But this is the main
Okay.
ones that we care about. And create React app automatically came with those installed. And then
Nice.
after it created the package JSON, under the hood, it runs an npm install for you, so you don't have to. But if you were to add more libraries here, then you need to run npm install.
gotcha.
So really all you guys need to worry about is just create React app to create your root folder, and that's kind of it.
Cool.
Brief second to talk about the homework and how he's running. So we're following this guy, I don't remember his name right now. Let me flip over to this other curriculum folder. Where are we? Module 3, module 4. I'm gonna move whatever we need. It looks like a lot. I watched it on 1.5. You guys might want to watch it on 1 and like rewatch it. But most of this first 10, it's only like 20 minutes long. And a lot of it is talking about the things that I talked about today. I kind of wanted to talk about it with you guys first, and so you're kind of exposed to it because he, kind of talks like he knows that you know a lot about React and how these things work.
And yet,
And so this is kind of the first 10 are just kind of talking about, here are the basics of React. I'm gonna group that in with this day 2 pre-work, and so these things I'm gonna send out tonight. All of this is stuff before Saturday. It's really not that much. I know it looks like a lot. Some of the videos are like literally a minute long. And so this stuff here, it'll go back to like, you guys learned something, we'll talk about it. You guys learned something, we'll talk about it. So this is stuff that is what we talked about today. This is stuff that we're going to talk about next time. And so I'll send out this list of stuff after class.
Thanks, Braden.
Sweet.
See you all Saturday.
what a blast. Thanks, guys.
Thank
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
See y'all.